Yeah, hi everyone. I think I do know quite a few of you, same as Mark. I think that's one of the things I was thinking about before giving this talk, is kind of how long we've been around, and I'll be talking a bit about that. I don't know whether you're allowed to get your Mojo back in your 40s, but we'll see about that. So Java. Google is a pretty good way of getting some sense of interest in things. And the trend here is pretty clear. We had a massive upswing late 90s into about 2005, and then things began to die off. And this is like people searching for Java or not doing so. I kind of jumped straight in. I haven't said anything about RedMonk. You probably don't care, but maybe I should say a bit about that so you can get a sense of where I'm coming from. We're an industry analyst company, and we do things a bit differently from the Gartners and IDCs and so on, in that we just felt some of the approaches to data that they took had some issues. If you do surveys of people, particularly elite developers, you're not going to get particularly good answers because elite developers don't fill in surveys. If you try and understand market share by just asking, say, IBM, Dell, and HP what Linux servers they shipped at any given time, you're not going to get a very good answer as to what distributions are being used. And finally, the mathematical, the hockey sticks we see so often tend to be an issue. So at RedMonk, in the past, we were really a qualitative firm, and we're making a transition to quantitative based on the data that's actually available out there. So whether that be Google Trends, whether that be things we see on Stack Overflow or Hacker News, trying to pull data together, because we're much more interested not in what a purchaser said they thought was what developers should use, but rather what developers are actually using. The IT industry has shifted pretty markedly. It's not a top-down purchasing anymore. As we saw with the cloud, we know organizations that literally have used their stationary budget or their FedEx budget to buy Amazon Web Services in order to build IT services. The developers are making a lot of the choices now, and that's the kind of the world that RedMonk is trying to understand. So you'll see a bit of that in this presentation, our approach to data. So we're on this downslope in terms of Java and Google searches. But what did that actually mean? There's been an awful lot of naysaying on the web and in general. In fact, I mean, how many of you have been told recently Java is dead? I'm assuming that's something you've heard a lot. Wow, you're doing a good job of remaining down in your silos if you're not hearing that, folks. Maybe this talk isn't necessary after all. I'll just head off. But this really got my goat. I know Tim, and he's a clever chap. But I thought there was something missing in his view of the world when he wrote this. That in fact the cool stuff was not being built in Java. Partly because I was like, well, maybe the cool stuff isn't, but what about the stuff that scales? And if we think about what are the useful services, or in fact, what's changed since 2010 when Tim said this, because I looked at it and I was like, well, hang on a minute. Your job is being an Android evangelist. And the last time I looked, that is indeed Java. And when I look at big data, which to me is probably one of the most interesting things we're seeing in the web, some of the core projects, some of the most important technology, again, built in Java. I think the important question is whether this is accidental. So my esteemed colleagues at firms like Forrester, I'm a bit unfair to Mike to call him out because he's a bit of a troll. But Java is a dead end for enterprise app development. I think he's like one of those reporters that gets paid based on how many tech meme hits there are or something, because he loves this X is dead thing. And yeah, Java's a dead end according to Forrester. So if any of your colleagues are kind of bringing in research notes, report notes, and so on, you'll hear some of this stuff. We've heard very similar things from the other major firms. I mean, I think it's kind of funny because RedMonk tends to be a little bit ahead of the curve because we're dealing with developers, and yet it seems to me that some of the big analyst firms here, they're ahead of, well, I'm not sure what they're up to, but it's not a position we agree with. Java turns gray. Who here has some gray hair? Oh, come on, there's more of you than that. So, yeah, I don't show it so much up here, but here I do. So my mum says, you've got to shave your beard because it's white. I don't know, if I could grow it any longer, I'd probably go the full Gandalf. But I thought this was interesting and not entirely unsurprising, that there is a statistically significant relationship in terms of Java and who's using it. So we are getting older. But I think that might be okay. I mean, you know, as a society, it seems that we're allowed to, I don't know, stay young at heart. I'm still trying to get to grips with this thing of being in my 40s. But I think we're still building some cool things. And certainly, it doesn't feel, when I'm talking to Java developers, when I'm out there in the industry, that I'm on some sort of downslope. So I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to stick with that in how I feel, and let's see if the data can support that. So there is some interesting stuff that's gone on. You know, I don't think anyone would have really expected the massive sort of upsurge of interest in C that Apple has generated. But I think what's important here, if we're looking at actual commits into Olo, is that Java is just, it's pretty consistent. We're not actually seeing a drop-off. We're seeing plenty of activity in terms of commits. On the other hand, if we look at like JavaScript, so this is a growth story as opposed to a stability story. So JavaScript is exploding. Who here is using any JavaScript at the moment in the code you write? Awesome. And again, were you doing that 2 years ago? So we've seen something I think very interesting, which is JavaScript and Java both being used together. A tweet I put out about, well, it's got more retweets than any other tweet I've ever done. So I don't know, somebody must have liked it. It's 300 or so, which is, it used to be that learning JavaScript meant you weren't a serious software developer. Today, the opposite is true. So JavaScript is definitely part of the tool set. We're seeing it move server-side, and there's just explosive interest in it. So Java, again, it's pretty consistent performance, but JavaScript is coming along. And in terms of contributors, we're definitely seeing a cadre of young JavaScript programmers. Not clear yet how many of them might learn Java, but that's not necessarily what's important. So finally, in terms of projects, again, Java's performing pretty well. But language fragmentation is just part of what we're doing here. Java is not well, Java is a language, but certainly Java is also a platform. A lot of you are using optimizations around the JVM, but I'm sure that a lot of you have also been, I don't know, maybe a little bit Scala curious. You may have looked at JRuby as an approach. And I think the important thing here is the optimizations and the performance that you can get out of Java. That there is this sort of view, I think, well, there are all sorts of view in tech, but I think there is a view always that native always kind of wins. But if you look at what we can do with Java performance optimization, that's not always the case. And certainly looking at JRuby, it's pretty clear that we're now seeing that JRuby is performing in many cases better than Ruby itself. There are all these language choices, and I think that's a good thing. So who here considers themselves a polyglot programmer? Anyone just a Java programmer? Okay, I don't know what the other ones are. If it's not polyglot, binary glot, I don't know. Who here is dual national? No, just kidding. So I think the bottom line here is that Java can support this. Language fragmentation is real. Developers, as I've said, are increasingly making the choices. They're not being defined from the top down. And Java's actually dealt with this pretty well as an ecosystem and as a platform. And this is where that thing about being over 40 gets really hard. I spend an awful lot of time looking at slides at conferences and going, I can't read that at all. And one of the things that I actually think the Mac does really well is that zooming. My machine doesn't do that quite well, but what I'm going to say is, what we do at RedMonk is we try and understand what's going on by looking at actual activity on these networks. And so we've got, basically, we're looking at what's happening in GitHub by tag. And if we just had one data source, that would be fine, but you really want a correlation. So then you look at Stack Overflow and what's happening in terms of the conversation. And by correlating those, you get this scatter plot, and you begin to get some sense of languages. And when we started doing this, and I'm not going to lie and say that RedMonk sort of had the idea originally. It's a guy called Drew Conway from the Dataists. But it was something that he just hacked up on a weekend and sort of said, OK, that's interesting. RedMonk, on the other hand, said, no, that's really interesting. We do it on a quarterly basis and have turned it into part of our business. And we sort of look at that Toby stuff, and that's all very well and good. This, we think, also adds some value. But we think what's interesting is, clearly, in terms of language fragmentation, up at the top there, it's not as if there's just a Java and .NET choice. I mean, you all know that. But the fact that Java and JavaScript really seem to be out in front of the pack, and clearly we've got PHP and others, but that's really interesting. And we haven't seen a great deal of change over the past sort of 2 to 3 years that we've been doing this, other than to say that actually the performance of Java seems to be increasing using this approach. Job trends. This seems pretty good. I mean, obviously, downturns aren't cool, but it's not like JavaScript, which, as we've already said, is performing pretty well, is smashing Java. In fact, we're seeing the same sorts of trends, and I honestly don't know what this sort of hiring dip is. So if any of you know, please tell me. Don't understand that hiring dip, other than the key thing here is to say that it doesn't seem to be hurting Java. Does anyone have an idea what that hiring dip might be? Are we in the midst of some extra recession that I missed? Was this sort of the end of, I don't know, quantitative easing or something? And again, in terms of list traffic, MarkMail has some really useful data. We're still seeing really significant activity and traction. We're not seeing sort of Java community stop talking. We're in fact seeing an increase in activity in interesting projects. And what are these projects, and what should we care about? So to me, I think Cassandra is very interesting. Any of you had any experience with Cassandra, the database? Wow, this is not a web crowd, is it? OK, well, so who here just uses Oracle? People are not admitting things. OK, well, so is it a MySQL crowd? Interesting. So what databases are you guys using? Anyway, sorry? Flat files, you're way ahead of me. OK. This is a Java audience, no relational databases. Of course not. That's not what we grew up with. I think Cassandra is interesting to my mind because it is built in Java. And it is a database that is now beginning to put some pressure on Oracle. This is something we didn't really expect. Certainly at RedMonk, my view was that Oracle was just going to stay there. It was going to be the relational database. It was going to be the warm, cozy duvet that you were not going to get out of. We felt that, basically, if you look at the way the history of IT has gone, it tends to be accretive. It tends to be layers upon layers upon layers. IT is more like a reef than something else. I mean, it's very rare that you come in and sort of bulldoze everything away. I spend a lot of time actually still in and around mainframe issues. And yeah, mainframe, that data's staying in DB2, or it's staying in some of the older flat file systems that Andy mentioned. So what is interesting is that I've been running across organizations. Sky is an example. They were like, well, we just need a database that's highly available for the shopping cart. And they went with Cassandra. And then they sort of said, you know what? This was a really good experience. And it was less painful and less expensive than Oracle. And so actually, we're going to start training some of our people in Cassandra query language and start going, well, actually, we're going to go Cassandra first. I'll let Sky tell that story themselves, but certainly the fact that an organization like that is making that consideration is very interesting to me, because we expected, oh yeah, there'll be some situational stuff. But the fact that organizations are now actively saying, no, no, we do need an entirely new approach to data management is a massive fillip for Java, because a lot of this stuff is built in Java. Neo4j, it's a graph database, great people. Lots of people talk nonsense about NoSQL, and many of them are industry analysts. I would say if you want to know really what the story is about NoSQL, and they've done an amazing job in that they didn't evangelize Neo4j, which is a graph database, but really what different kinds of workloads are applicable in NoSQL. Again, it's interesting technology, built in Java. They don't have any plans to change. Hadoop. Hadoop is, who here has had to do a Hadoop project? Wow, I'm really surprised by the responses to some of these questions, which is quite good. I mean, one would assume maybe it's being left to the BI teams or something. Hadoop, extremely explosive, whatever sort of dimension you want to look at. I'm going to talk a bit about the web companies taking advantage of Hadoop and the amount of engineering that they're putting into it. But if we just look at the IT industry, well, I recently said, never have so few vendor agreements been made about so few customers. No, that one's not resonating. Okay, tough crowd. Maybe I need some more energy, because I don't know that you've got enough this morning. So yeah, it's a bit like OpenStack. It's a thing where you've got so many vendors all agreeing with stuff that, you know, who knows or cares what the, you know, customers are actually doing, because there aren't that many. Hadoop, it does seem a bit of a vendor fest at the moment, but at the same time, there are some customers getting some significant business advantage from this. And I think what I found interesting is just the rate at which Hadoop, which was web technology, has been adopted in terms of being enterprise technology. You know, I can't think of a technology that was more aggressively taken up by the industry, perhaps than Eclipse, which served a very clear need when the drop was done in 2001. I'm wearing my, this is an original, the first t-shirt ever made by the Eclipse Foundation. No sponsor names, which is really weird. And so I've kept it for a long time. It's got a hole in it, but I'll keep wearing it. Anyway, if we look at Hadoop, it's the degree to which that is becoming the context for storing data. And again, I've talked about the pressure on the incumbents. People are saying, well, you know, the old approach of the relational databases and data marts is kind of breaking down. That's a big deal. Private cloud, Eucalyptus. An explicit decision to adopt Java. And Lucene, again, the same thing. So if we look at the kind of the technology stacks that we're seeing emerge around big data, very clearly, Java has a significant role to play. And again, the question is this accidental? The relevance. So yeah, I mean, Tim Bray saying, oh, you know, Java's not relevant. Well, I can't really see that as being true. So, okay, now this time I'm hoping I will get some kind of decent response. So I know, I'll start with so who here has got a BlackBerry? Awesome, okay, good. BlackBerry is doing well, very, very well. But you know, BlackBerry's not doing badly because of Java. I'm not gonna make that move. Clearly, in a sense, the Sun the Sun vision of Java kind of won. It's just that Sun not so much. Android, who's got an Android phone? Ah, okay, that does not surprise me. So this is a crowd that's probably like, okay, yeah, Apple, you can tell me what to do for a while, but eventually I'm gonna find something that you didn't tell me what to do. So, I mean, the Android experience, pretty clearly, you know, people that are comfortable with IDEs, people that have grown up with Eclipse, yeah, why would you not use this? In terms of classes and the way it works, the expectations, again, it's kind of a Java that actually works for mobile. And I don't know, I mean, you can kind of turn around and say, well, that's not Java, but I guess if you do that, you're probably Oracle. It's you know, it's a very specific thing. I think what matters is, are your skills applicable? Can you build great apps with this? And I think the answer is clearly yes. And also, Java's becoming really Android is becoming really beautiful. I mean, you know, the rate at which Google is kind of improving the design experience, and it's really not what we expect. It's not what we expect, and we were always told that it could never be true. But it turns out that you actually can begin to build some really great native client experiences using Java technologies. Yeah, so Oracle and Google. It kind of seems like at this point, you know, it's done. Kind of Google won that. We don't need to worry about it. They're both big and ugly enough and sort of patent rich enough that we can, I think, assume it's good. We've had court case. And yeah, so this battle, when I talked 2-3 years ago about the position of Java, we didn't know how this was going to shake out. But it seems to me it's not quite as important as it was in terms of an issue for the Java community. So Netflix. I don't know if any of you have seen the Netflix website for open source projects, but I think it's really cool. You know, it's not often when you're going to browse open source projects, it's put together like that. The point I wanted to make is that Netflix is doing something very interesting. I think the nature of who creates software is changing. So it used to be that software companies built software and kind of that was it. Sure, organizations also built software for their own use, but they didn't often think, oh, this is something that other organizations are going to use as well. But we're sort of seeing these transition phases, and you know, it's getting harder and harder to sell just pure software. It increasingly seems like people want to buy data or they want to buy the associated services. And yeah, Netflix, they're not a technology provider, or they at first glance they aren't. They're somebody that provides video services. But if you look at something like Chaos Monkey, have any of you used Chaos Monkey? Okay, Chaos Monkey is a really nice bit of kit if you're building large-scale distributed applications. And what it does is it breaks things on an intentional basis. It'll just go out and it will turn something off in your infrastructure. And that's something that you have to deal with because Netflix knows that things are going to fall over because it relies on Amazon, right? So it's architecting for resilience, and it expects that occasionally things will suddenly turn off, although apparently nobody tested turn off Amazon East region and see what happens. So the idea is that you've got to scale things, and in order to do that, you have to expect they'll break, and the way to do that is to have something that actively breaks them. Now that's all very well and good, but what I think is interesting is that Netflix has said, well, we're just going to give this technology away. We're not going to create a business out of it, and now IBM is picking this stuff up. So Andrew Spiker is off going, oh yeah, Netflix is actually creating this cool stuff that I can then use in creating customer value. But what is Netflix doing here? It's decided that this software is not its core business, but that the software has value. That being the case, what does it do? Well, it does the kinds of things we've seen in open source, and particularly, the kinds of things that we've seen out of the Apache Foundation, Apache Software Foundation, saying, well, how do we manage this stuff? We don't want to manage this, but the Java community can. If we're going to become some sort of company that's going to create value, sure, we can open source it, but you need those levels of governance upon that, and kind of who's going to do that? And again, it seems pretty clear to me that in terms of what I pointed out in data, or as we go forward, the Apache Software Foundation is going to be a big part of this world. And also, if we look at kind of the Eclipse governance structures, Java has been an ecosystem for development of governance models. There are many of them. And for organizations that want to understand how to interact with the market, Java's the place to come. Because it isn't a single governance model, they are legion. I mean, you can go with the kind of stuff that OSGI has done, kind of benevolent dictatorship, Apache Software Foundation, where absolutely everybody has a vote. You might go with Eclipse. There are numerous models, but I think that Java has something to show the industry about how you build open source software, frankly. Yeah, you can't build, actually, the Minecraft UI sucks, but the point I'm making here is my son would quite happily spend his entire life in a Java application. So any of you play Minecraft? Yeah, any of you have kids that play Minecraft? Yeah, more of you. And I didn't know why. I did a little bit of research. I haven't spoken to Notch, the programmer, but I think it's interesting because for me, what I like about Mojang is bloody hell. It is an absolute engine of cash. I mean, people talk about these kind of cool startups or Twitter or whatever it is, and it's still okay. It takes them a while. They might make some revenues. All Mojang does is make money. So Notch said, right, okay, I'm going to build this application, and there is a lightweight gaming library built in Java that I'm going to use to build this cool stuff. It's really simple, and actually that's okay. And millions of downloads, small team making a massive impact, providing great experiences that scale concurrently for millions of users. And again, the fact that we've got this phenomenon happening in Java is very interesting to me because Java's dead, right? But they didn't start doing this as a company until 2009. So we've got this incredible economic phenomenon, this opportunity to make shed loads of cash. And it's funny because they still talk about, what a drag it is having to port to the iPad. So usage, and Java's still out there. It's still, security kind of issues notwithstanding, incredibly well penetrated. So if you're building apps, why would you not take advantage of that? Has Java peaked? I guess. But I think the question is, what does that mean? Is that an important question? I guess has Europe peaked? Has America peaked? Yeah, probably. Has China peaked? Don't know, but they're all going to be here for a while, right? So I think that dead, peaked, not sure. But I think what's really important is what's actually going on. I mean, it may not be quite the broad-based phenomenon it was. But some of the companies that grew up in opposition to Java, and if you saw my presentation a couple of years back, this slide hasn't changed much. When web companies grow up, they turn into Java shops, which to you lot sounds fine. When I use this slide in front of a web audience, they start freaking out and start thinking, no, that can't be right. Everything should be in Ruby. No, that's all bullshit. Program in Nodejs. Then everything will be great because it's non-blocking. You guys should possibly look up the non-blocking meme if you haven't come across that. What 21-year-olds think of scale. So when web companies grow up, and literally, avowedly, we will do something better. So, Twitter was going to be built on Ruby. And, early days, it was. And I've got a great deal of respect for the people that built that app. I mean, if you look at the work that Blaine did, the work that people like Alex Payne later did, on the other hand, it did always, to me, you've all seen, kind of Mad Max 2, right? The one with the helicopter and the guys. Was that 2 or 3? But Mad Max, he's puttering along in that kind of helicopter, trying to keep it up in the air and fuel it and fix it all in the air. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Okay. Did you guys go drinking last night or something? So he's like, you're trying to keep it alive. And I actually like Twitter downtime. It gives me time to, think. It gives me time to relax. It's a zen moment. The stream stops flowing. It's great. It's frozen. Good. I'll ignore that. That's fine. But clearly, you can only celebrate downtime for so long. And Twitter, I think the other thing that was interesting for me about Twitter is that a lot of people thought it was easy. Like, there were all these people going, what is wrong with those guys? Why don't they just, build a better app, and then it will scale? Oh, they could just use a Palmer central event processing engine. It's just going to be fine, I think a lot of people didn't really understand the scale challenges that Twitter was taking on. But if you want to see the Twitter challenges at scale, clearly the last US election was a big deal for them, because what Twitter found was that the traffic stopped being bursty. So it wasn't even like, oh, we're going to have to deal with a spike at a particular time of 50 million users using the system at the same time. It was, oh, we're going to have to deal with 50 million users using the system at the same time for the next 3 hours, or 4 hours, or 5 hours. And they just went, oh shit, what are we going to do? And the truth was that Java was a big part of that answer and continues to be. And initially at first, it's still like, oh no, Java sucks. Java sucks, it sucks hard, but the JVM is okay. So we're gonna do some stuff on the JVM, but Java sucks. We're gonna use Scala, because that is awesome. And they went in, and Dave Pollack helped with the Lift framework so that they could actually be able to do anything with Scala, which was really complicated and nobody understood. So they wanted to use this framework, and they went and did that, and it's like, yeah, the JVM is, but actually it turned out that that wasn't true either. And so Twitter began to program in Java. So now they have a mixed estate, and it's Java and Scala. And when you look at the things that the organization is saying, they basically say they could not have stood up without falling over during the US elections without Java. And that's not accidental. I mean, I've asked you a couple of times, is it accidental? This absolutely isn't. So yeah, Twitter is now on the JCP. So the company that initially said, Java's bullshit, we're going to do Ruby, uh-oh, that didn't work, okay, we need to fix that, is now on the JCP. They're a big part of the thing. Amazon, I guess they never made some of the noises that these other firms made about how Java sucked, because they already had gray hair. And they knew that in building large-scale engineering and service-oriented architectures and so on, actually Java can be quite useful. So Amazon, Java Shop, Yahoo. I mean, Hadoop, it's just got so much data in it. It's absurd how quickly that has grown. I mean, the Facebook cluster alone it's one of those, you can't even say how big it is. It's just, petabyte after petabyte after petabyte, and it's filling out all the time. And Facebook, they used to say, Java sucks. That stuff is no good. We're going to lock ourselves in a room and hack on these dynamic languages. Well, it turns out that, if you want to build really high-scale maintainable systems, oh, wait, we want to use someone else's stuff because actually ours is not as good. So we're going to jettison some technology, and we're going to start using Hadoop as built out by Yahoo because of the scale requirements we have. And you can't do that kind of engineering at scale without becoming effectively a Java shop. Google, somewhat ambiguous, but still using a ton of Java inside, and LinkedIn, somewhat like Amazon, old enough and ugly enough to know that you don't just need to chase the latest hotness. But this thing about Hadoop, and the thing that strikes me, so Hadoop is not just a singleton. It's actually a mixed stack, lots of stuff. We don't know how it's going to turn out. There might be some Storm and Kafka in there. LinkedIn's providing technology. Twitter's throwing stuff over the fence. There's all this big data technology. But I think what was really interesting here is this is the stack that Facebook is using now in terms of graph search. So, Facebook, obviously their big deal is the social graph. They need technologies to analyze that. They don't want to have to stand up their own. So they adopted Apache Giraffe, which is a graph search engine built in Java. And why did they do that? Well, oh wow. Hey, guys, it actually performs quite well. Not just that, but it actually works with Hadoop. And in terms of our Java libraries, it kind of makes sense that this all works together. And so engineering decisions at Hadoop around Facebook around Hadoop are now leading them to adopt other platforms to make them more effective because they don't want to build them themselves. Again, built in Java with the Apache software foundation behind that. Is that by accident? I think not. So I was thinking about this, and it's like, well, we know that Java was the architect's choice. That was something we were very used to, and many of you are living this. Many of you are those architects. And that's fine. It's not clear that kind of Java is the developer's choice. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of developers, and could kind of bang on about that for a long time in terms of segmentation. But it does seem to me that Java is the engineer's choice. For people that are building really scalable systems that are going to be maintainable over time, Java keeps, you know, they may initially say we don't want to be using Java, but it's useful enough. And engineers deal in the world of reality and utility rather than just the world of kind of, oh, it's going to be awesome because it's in Node.js. Or it's on Mongo, so it will always scale, or whatever it is. However, I don't want to say that all this other developer stuff doesn't matter, because clearly, if you don't have a broad base of developers, then we're going to be on the downslope, that we're not going to manage to come out of this step. So if we look at our programming language rankings, yep, JavaScript, very noisy, very active up there. We've got these other languages. But one of the things that we have noticed at RedMonk is that it's not actually languages that you should follow. It is frameworks. Frameworks are the way to understand language adoption. So Ruby was nothing other than, you know, some crazy object people kind of doing stuff, you know, around a language that Mats had built until Rails came along. The framework made it explosive. It was the framework that enabled people to really start getting things done, and so that, you know, human beings could do this development rather than just like, I don't know, what do we call them? Really clever people. So yeah, JavaScript right now, Node is absolutely dragging that along as a sort of an engine. Certainly, it's. I mean, what happened to us at RedMonk, one of the things that began us on this path to trying to understand our own data and others was that Node.js was crushing everything else by 2 to 3 orders of magnitude when people searched on our web presences. And so we thought, well, you know, if that's where all the searches are coming from, something is going on. But again, it's very, very clear. Like JavaScript, we'd look at Node, and there are a lot of client-side frameworks that are also worth considering. But if we look at Python, it's Django. Django is driving that. If we look at Rails, yeah, we know what's happening, and these frameworks are the frameworks that are leading adoption of these languages, and it makes perfect sense. And that's excellent and clear. Java, on the other hand, is just like this weird, there's a ton of different frameworks, all being like, well, we could kind of do something like that. We'd be a little bit like Sinatra, we'll be a little bit like any number of the frameworks we already saw. I mean, you know, we've got Vertex in here. But there's sort of choice, and Java's great at being a sort of an incubator and sort of a place where you can plant a lot of flowers. Here, it doesn't seem to be so good. Like, for the Commodore Garden developer that just wants to build web apps, what's my choice? What's getting all the attention? Who do I look at to understand that? You know, who's the 37 signals that's like, oh yeah, this is how you build apps, this is Ruby on Rails, this is signal to noise. And this is goodness, but it does create some challenges because it doesn't seem like there's any one framework to pull the language with it. And I don't think Oracle gets this. I'm not sure who would play this leadership position. But again, if we really want to see some explosive growth again in Java, we do need to be making it easier to build applications and the kinds of applications that people want now. It might be in and around big data. That might be an opportunity. But, you know, it's sort of surprising because you look at Vertex, and it's really cool. It's really cool technology, but it's one of many. So yeah, these open source web frameworks, again, nothing has really emerged as the way of doing things, and yet most applications today are web apps. So what is going on here? Why do we have to wait until the engineer makes the choice? Frameworks are evolving. And I think at any given time in Java, you have to kind of go, wait, and you all know this, for all the fact it provides scale, maintainability, everything else, it's really ugly and kludgy over time, and it constantly needs to be refactored. So Spark is just an attempt to make the lightest weight web framework that you could. They looked at the design principles behind Sinatra, and they're like, okay, this is what we're going to develop around. You know, I'm not saying that I think this is going to be the new hotness that pulls a lot more developers onto the platform, but clearly simplicity really matters in terms of building web apps and frameworks, and this is something that the Java community as a whole needs to be thinking about. You know, it's not the language that matters, it's not the JVM that matters, it's what's the framework that makes it easy to code to. Again, you know, we continue to be in a pretty good place. So if we're looking at Hacker News, yep, you know, Java's still there. It's still a significant part of the conversation. But I think it is worth looking at, I guess, maybe you're more interested in production runtimes. So Google Trends again. We all know that Spring kind of won. But one thing that I thought was really interesting when you begin to look at this is that, and we'll look in a bit more detail, that WebLogic was on a downslope, but Oracle kind of held that off for a few quarters. So you normally imagine that Oracle buys something and then, you know, no, I'm not going to say it. You imagine that Oracle buys something and then they get into a quarrel with someone in the community and then you're not quite sure what's going to happen. That's happened, you know, with Jenkins and so on. WebLogic, they came in, bought WebLogic, stopped investing in Glassfish. That's a little bit overly aggressive. I'm sure someone from Oracle will come and quarrel with that. And it did sustain for a while. But it couldn't really sustain in the face of something where we'd all said, well, we don't want J2EE application servers. We need things to be easier. Spring was that refactoring, and Spring won. Stack Overflow, exactly the same thing, different data source. See the same Oracle bump, which is very interesting. My colleague Donnie Burkholz noticed that. So, and initially at least, they evidently did a really good job of persuading everyone, no, keep investing in WebLogic. Who here runs WebLogic? Anyone? Nobody's going to admit it. It's high-scale technology. It's expensive high-scale technology, but it's high-scale technology. So, yeah, again, doesn't matter which way you cut it. When we look at the traditional app servers, they're not in a happy place. Attention is dropping off, conversation is dropping off, and you could be, say, James, come on, you're just talking about conversations on Hacker News. What does that have to do with production? Well, we're lucky enough to have a partnership with the company New Relic. New Relic is a hosting company, and whilst in the past I was skeptical of this, you know, if we ask a vendor for some information, how can we base any analyses on that? But of course, New Relic's in an interesting position because it's effectively, it's a cloud platform. And what happens is when you're hosting an application in, say, Heroku or Amazon or whatever, you can basically use New Relic for monitoring. So they pull back all this telemetry and information about what is being used with what. And it's telemetry, it's machine data. This is not a survey or anything else. This is just actually what's running on their servers. Now, there are some SKUs within that. This is not all providers. But again, if we look at the performance of, I mean, Jetty just continued, Jetty came from nowhere and kind of has exploded. But this is pretty much what we'd expect in relation to what the conversation is telling us. So we've got some real data about application server usage. We know that Spring won. We know that kind of Resin is in there. And Tomcat continues to be the context in which most workloads are deployed. So again, a couple of years back, it seemed like Oracle and IBM had very cozily said, OK, we're just carving this all up. Java is our playground. These are our two farms. We're going to put fences around them and own them and start one of the things I didn't mention in the other slides that was interesting is how quickly JBoss has been dropping off as well. That from a Red Hat perspective, buying that, it's people talk about, buying falling knives. That one doesn't seem to have worked out quite as well for them as they expected. But yeah, Oracle and IBM, clearly they kind of hate each other. But they hate each other in a way that has allowed them to make lots of money. And from a shareholder value perspective, that's quite a good way of hating each other. But there's also a sort of a problem, because in IBM's mind, they're much more of an inventor of Java than Oracle ever was. From an IBM perspective, in fact, they think they invented Java probably more than Sun. IBM was always just an accidental implementation detail that they needed this other person running point on community. IBM absolutely feels this sort of ownership around Java. What is IBM doing? So pretty clearly, IBM is beginning to do a bit of hedging. Whilst on the one hand, contractually, they can happily go, oh yeah, Oracle can't do anything bad. When it comes to patents and all the IP stuff and just everything that Oracle has shown in terms of litigiousness, I mean, that's not really a very comfortable place to be, is it? Because you want to keep making money while you hate each other. That's the key thing to remember. So IBM, they see this Spring thing, and they're like, well, okay, we're not going to keep being able to sell application servers in the way we were. We're going to have to kind of rethink that. We're going to need these lightweight things like Liberty. And also, maybe we need a whole new thing. So Jerry Cuomo, the CTO that came out of, it's funny because he apologizes for that. Have any of you seen Jerry Cuomo speak? So he goes out and just completely apologizes for Java. I mean, he's like, I am so sorry. I have 3 awesome high-performance sports cars and, put my kids through college. So Java was great from that perspective, but I am sorry for the pain I caused you. And this is one of IBM's chief technology officers. What's interesting, he's now like node curious. He just did a deal recently with MongoDB. And whilst IBM has not said, okay, here is an alternative stack, they're certainly beginning to look to hedge their options. SAP, I was at TechEd last week, and same thing. Clearly SAP has been a big supporter of Java. It's got a lot of value out of Java. But they're mental enough to think they're going to get a new language to stick called River. I mean, I don't know. If I was SAP, I don't think inventing a new programming language would be my first priority. But again, they feel they need to be able to push back if Oracle really does make things worse for the ecosystem. I think the bottom line, as I see it, is that Oracle's not going to kind of kill that golden goose. But yeah, around JEE and those profiles, there is a lot of killing to be done. I think lightweight frameworks is going to have to be the way forward, and certainly for everyone else, hedging strategies for now. Yeah, Apache, everything I've pointed out in terms of big data, almost all of that has come through Apache. So the phenomenon of customers open sourcing stuff like Netflix, that is a phenomenon that wouldn't be possible without Apache. Because of the IP and the governance and everything else that is required. There was a young guy that wrote a piece recently. I call him young, I don't know, it might have been my age, but it felt like it was written by a young guy. He said Apache software considered harmful, that somehow, oh, governance is a bad thing. You should not worry about that. Just publish all your source code to GitHub and it doesn't matter. I've described this phenomenon as POS, post-open source software, where you're just like, oh, screw it, I'll put it on GitHub, it'll be fine. But I think the role of Apache is just more important than ever. So I think as a Java community, what I would be wanting to do is to support them in doing that. Continue to pay your dues at Apache, basically. And when I say pay your dues, I don't mean you have to pay them money. But they're playing a really critical role in the future of Java. We can't leave it up to one center of gravity. It is a multipolar world. And And yeah, I don't know that we're quite at the upswing yet. I know in the abstract it said upswing, so if I oversold, I'm sorry guys. I was hoping that I would be able to show you an upswing in data. Wasn't really able to do that. There was one, although, I don't know, I mean, you know, maybe we could, so Dawn of the Dead, anybody? Zombies, brains. Zombies are very popular in the culture, and maybe Java is one. I'm not sure whose brains it's eating, but have we got, was there an upswing there? I don't know. I mean, it might be sustainable. We don't know what's going to happen right there, right? But the bottom line is, when I look out at Java developers, whether they be in the enterprise, whether they be in web companies, whether they be in customers, whether they be in ISVs, Java seems to have an awful lot of runway left. There's significant innovation happening. There are cool games being written in Java. It plays as active a role in the conversation as I have seen. If we look at workloads, I mean, from a workload perspective, given that everything is going in Hadoop, I mean, most of the world's data is going to be in a Java-based system in a very, very short order. I mean, HDFS is pulling everything in. It is the new relational database. Or at least it's the new storage engine of choice. So yeah, I don't know, 2008, then 2011, we keep going back. And I'm able to keep giving a similar talk, and we're seeing more and more data points that indicates that Java is in rude health. So you guys have got jobs for a while. Thank you very much.